Every nation on this planet carries a burden, a weight so massive, so mathematically impossible that if you stopped to calculate it, you'd realize something is fundamentally broken. The United States, $38 trillion in debt. Japan, $9 trillion. The entire world, $315 trillion, 3 times larger than everything humanity produces in a year. But here's where your mind should pause. Here's where the question should form like ice in your chest. If everyone owes money, who exactly do they owe it to? This isn't a riddle. It's the most important economic question you've never been taught to ask. Because when you trace the chain of creditors backwards, when you follow the paper trail through centuries of banking halls and government ledgers, you discover something that changes everything. The world doesn't owe money to some external force. It doesn't owe money to aliens or future generations or some cosmic accountant. The world owes money to itself. But that's not the disturbing part. The disturbing part is that 4 men, 4 financial architects across 3 different centuries engineered it this way, deliberately, methodically, with full knowledge of what they were creating. They built a system where debt can never be repaid, where governments must borrow eternally, where interest flows upward like water defying gravity, and where every payment, every crisis, every bailout only strengthens the trap. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented history. The meetings happened, the contracts exist in archives, the mechanisms operate in plain sight, printed in economics textbooks, debated in Congress, analyzed by the IMF. Once you see how they built it, once you understand the blueprint, you'll realize that 38 trillion isn't a problem waiting to be solved. It's the system working exactly as designed. Let me introduce you to the 4 architects, 4 moments in history when the debt trap was engineered, 4 innovations that locked every government on Earth inside a cage with no exit. The first architect, William Paterson, 1694. Before 1694, the world of sovereign borrowing was brutal and honest. Kings needed money for wars, for palaces, for maintaining power. So they'd approach wealthy merchants or noble families, make promises, offer collateral. The merchant would lend gold, the king would promise repayment with interest. Sometimes kings paid back, often they didn't. When a king defaulted, the creditor lost everything. The king would simply find someone else naive enough to lend. It was risky for bankers, humiliating for monarchs. But it had one critical feature that no longer exists today. It ended. Debt was temporary. Either it was repaid or it was defaulted. The system cleared itself, reset, moved on. Then William Paterson appeared. A Scottish merchant, failed entrepreneur, a man who'd tried multiple schemes to build wealth and watched them collapse. But in 1691, he had an idea that would reshape not just England, not just Europe, but the entire architecture of civilization. England was bleeding money. King William III was at war with France. The treasury was empty. Tax revenues couldn't cover military costs. And traditional lenders had stopped answering the king's calls. England had defaulted before, and creditors had long memories. Paterson approached the king with a proposal so elegant, so mathematically perfect, that it should have been recognized immediately as either genius or catastrophe. He would organize a group of wealthy merchants. They would lend the government £1.2 million, roughly 300 million in today's currency, a staggering sum. But here's the innovation, the mutation in the DNA of finance. The loan would never be repaid. Instead of repaying the principal, the government would pay interest, forever, 8% annually, permanently. And to manage this bizarre arrangement, Paterson proposed creating something new, the Bank of England. The mechanics were revolutionary. Merchant lenders would deposit their gold with this new bank. The bank would lend it to the government. The government would pay interest each year from tax revenue. The bank would distribute that interest to the merchant lenders. But the principal? Untouchable, permanent, eternal. Why would merchants accept this deal? Why give up their gold for a promise that never matures? Because the interest payment was guaranteed by Parliament itself, backed by the government's power to tax its own citizens. As long as England existed, as long as it could extract taxes, the interest would flow like clockwork. And the banknotes the merchants received in exchange for their gold, they could be traded, sold, used as collateral. They were as good as gold, better than gold, because they paid interest. Parliament approved Paterson's scheme in 1694. The Bank of England received its charter. The merchants provided their gold. The king got his war funding. And for the first time in human history, national debt became permanent. Not a problem to solve, a feature of the system.
Here's what nobody explains about why Paterson's design was revolutionary for the bankers. The government paid 8% interest annually on £1.2 million. That's £96,000 per year, forever. The merchants had essentially purchased an annuity from the most powerful institution in England. As long as the nation existed, as long as it could tax its people, the money would flow into their coffers like a river that never runs dry. And if they wanted liquidity, if they needed their capital back, simple, they'd sell the banknotes to someone else. The debt was transferable, tradable, immortal, but never repayable. But Paterson's true genius, the element that would echo through 3 centuries, was what came next. The Bank of England was granted the right to issue banknotes backed by the government's debt. They could print paper money up to the value of the loan. Think about what this means. This created money out of debt. The government's IOU, its promise to pay, became currency itself. And the more the government borrowed, the more money could be created. Debt became the foundation of the money supply. This is the template, the original sin, the blueprint that every nation would eventually copy. Government borrows, never repays principal, pays interest eternally, and the debt itself transforms into money. It's brilliant if you're a banker. You've turned a loan into a permanent income stream. It's catastrophic if you're a taxpayer. You're paying interest on debt that will never, ever disappear. Within 50 years, every major power in Europe was copying the model. France created the Banque Générale. The Netherlands formalized its sophisticated banking into government debt issuance. And by 1790, the newly born United States of America adopted the same system. Alexander Hamilton, America's first Treasury Secretary, explicitly modeled the American financial system on the Bank of England. Permanent debt, interest paid from taxes, bonds traded as currency. Paterson died in 1719, not particularly wealthy despite birthing the Bank of England. But the system he created, still alive. 331 years later, the Bank of England still exists. British government debt has never been paid off. It's been refinanced, rolled over, expanded, repackaged, but never eliminated. The debt trap was set in 1694, and every government since has walked into it willingly, unknowingly, inevitably. The second architect, Nathan Rothschild, 1815. By the early 1800s, European governments had fully embraced permanent debt. They borrowed for wars, for infrastructure, for everyday operations. But there was chaos in the system. Each loan was negotiated individually. Interest rates swung wildly. Only the wealthiest merchants could participate. There was no organized market, no standardization, no efficiency. Nathan Rothschild changed everything. He didn't just participate in sovereign debt, he industrialized it. The Rothschild family began as money changers in Frankfurt's Jewish quarter, but by 1800, the 5 Rothschild brothers had established banking houses in 5 major European capitals: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples. This network was unprecedented. They could move information and money across borders faster than any government, any army, any competitor. And they used this speed to dominate sovereign debt issuance. Nathan Rothschild, operating from London, was the strategic mastermind. During the Napoleonic Wars, he arranged loans for Britain. But his innovation wasn't what he financed. It was how he structured it. Instead of lending directly to the government, Rothschild bought government bonds at a discount, then resold them to investors at a markup. He created a secondary market. Here's how it worked. The government needed money immediately. Rothschild provided it, fast. Then he sold the bonds to pension funds, insurance companies, wealthy aristocrats across Europe.
The government got instant liquidity. Rothschild collected the spread, the difference between what he paid and what he sold for. Investors got a tradable, interest-bearing asset. Everyone won, except taxpayers, who would pay the interest forever. But here's where the story turns dark. Rothschild didn't just finance governments. He positioned himself so that governments had no choice but to use him. June 18, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo. Nathan Rothschild, in London, learned of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else. His private courier network was faster than official government channels, faster even than the military messengers racing back to England. What he did next is financial legend. First, Rothschild began selling British government bonds, publicly, aggressively. Other investors saw this and panicked. If Rothschild was selling, Britain must be losing. Bond prices collapsed. Investors dumped their holdings in terror. Then, once prices hit rock bottom, Rothschild reversed course. He bought, massively, secretly. When official news of British victory arrived the next day, bond prices exploded upward. Rothschild's holdings multiplied in value overnight. He made millions, not from insider trading as we'd call it today, but from controlling information and manipulating market psychology. This established the Rothschild model: control the information, control the issuance, control the market. By 1820, the Rothschilds dominated European sovereign debt. If a government needed to borrow, they went through the Rothschilds. Because the Rothschilds controlled the investor network, the distribution channels, the pricing. They set the terms.